Welcome to the Gilded Age podcast, where you learn from the world's best community builders on how they use technology to build guilds of the future. I'm your host, Gary Sheng, and I cannot wait for you to learn more tools and techniques for organizing and scaling your community. Today's guest is Diana Chen, who is the host and mastermind behind the community-driven and owned crypto-focused podcast Rehash. In this episode, we dive into the tools that make it possible for a podcast to be co-owned, the fire that brought the Rehash community together, and her best tips for any podcaster or community builder. My first question for Diana is, Diana, tell us about yourself and the amazing community that you've built with Rehash.
For sure. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast. I'm very honored to be here and excited for this conversation. So Rehash, for anybody who doesn't know, is the first community-owned podcast. All of our episodes are published on-chain, and collectors become part of our community and have governance rights over who gets to come on the podcast. So if you listen to Rehash, all of the guests that we've had on the podcast, with the exception of season 1, we're on season 8 already, actually wrapping up season 8 at this point. All of the guests that we've had on the podcast, about 100 at this point, were all nominated and voted on by our community of podcast NFT holders who, go out there, scout out the best people, nominate them. We use JokeRace for that. Everything is on chain. You can go on JokeRace, search Rehash, and actually go back and dig through all the people that have been nominated for Rehash in the past. And then usually we take the top 10 people who receive the most votes each season. We do have a 2-tiered nomination voting structure as well, which I think is also important to call out, where all holders of Rehash NFTs have the power to nominate as many guests as they want for each season. However, the only people with voting rights are our past guests, past sponsors, and some other people, including early supporters of our Mirror crowdfund and other people that we brought along the way.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Diana. I have been pretty in awe of the way that you've built this community. And one phrase that struck to me was owning the podcast. And in your case, really helping many people own the podcast and own the direction of the podcast, and using all these different interesting tools to be able to make this vision a reality. Can you just talk more about how you've done all this?
Yeah, so we started Rehash back in April of 2022. Prior to that, I had been working at Rabbit Hole for about 6 months, trying to help them think through how to decentralize their content function. So I'd spent the last 6 months really diving deep into DAOs, and specifically with regards to content and marketing and media and how to decentralize that. So I had this idea that, part of it was, at that point, I had been podcasting for various companies in crypto, recorded, I think, 150 or 200 podcast episodes at that point. But, if you're, as is true if you're working for any company, once you leave the company, all the content that you've created is no longer yours. You don't really own any of that. And so I got to the point where I felt like I'd put in so much work, created all of this content, and I didn't own any of it. So I wanted to start my own podcast that I could actually have ownership over. In Web3, we talk about all the time ownership and how important that is. And I really wanted to, actually practice what I preached, in a sense. And then the other side of it was, through all of my DAO work and thinking through how to decentralize content and media and marketing, I wanted to gather a group of media folks in Web3, because especially back then and even today, there still aren't too many of us. And I wanted to get everybody together and test out some sort of governance thing. I didn't really know what it was. And so that's how I came up with the idea of creating a group of people, a DAO in a sense, and giving them governance rights over which guests get to come on the podcast. I had no idea how it was going to work out. It was completely experimental. I was fully ready for the experiment to die in a month or two. I had no idea we'd still be here over 2 years later, but it really, the results far surpassed any of my expectations. The guests that have been on the podcast have been way better guests than I could have found on my own. I've been introduced to so many new people through this process that I wouldn't have come across on my own. So I'm super grateful to the community for for finding me all of these great guests. And I'm just like really happy and grateful that this idea and this like experiment worked out.
When hearing about what you've pulled off, it strikes me as it requires a certain kind of leader that is down to just experiment with a lot of different frontier tools and figure out how to assemble them in practically useful ways. Can you talk more about your leadership style, whether you agree with this, whether you can add to this? Just tell me more about your leadership style.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. First of all, that's very kind for you to say. And it's funny because I've sort of been like casually diving into astrology recently. And there's the whole like how you perceive yourself and then how others perceive you. And so I was actually going around asking some friends how they perceived me at first. So love to hear that. But no, I think you're right. Like I am really open to new ideas, to experimenting with new things. Like if you come to me with a new platform, a new project, a new idea, I'm always going to be open to that until I've tried it and seen if it works or not. Why not? That's this whole space we're in. Web3 is we're innovating, we're trying something new. And so to me, like it doesn't make sense to be in the space and not be open to experimenting and trying new things. And I think especially coming out of the bear market that we just did, I really, like I've said this before, and I really believe like a bear market is a perfect time to experiment with things. It's really low stakes. There's no one really around. If you fail to a really small group of people. And then for when the next bull run comes around, everything's super fast. You don't have time to reflect and iterate and think about things. So experiment during the bear, and then during the bull, how to operate properly. But I also, like to your other point, like I do try as well to empower people around me to step up and do things. And I think this is a challenge in Web3 and in DAOs especially, is that we kind of expect people. I think the people who have naturally filtered into DAOs are people who tend to be self-starters, people who tend to have the courage to step in and accomplish the things that they want to accomplish rather than sitting back and waiting for permission to do things. I think it's naturally filtered for this, but if we want to continue growing these communities, I think we have to be open to bringing in all types of people. And that has been an interesting learning experience for me in thinking about how do we empower people who aren't naturally self-starters and naturally going to take the initiative to to feel comfortable stepping up and doing things in the community as well. And I can't say I've found a solution or I've written the playbook or anything. It's a continuous learning process, but I do think that's something that any community manager of a DAO or any organization in Web3 should really be thinking a lot about nowadays.
I feel like you've built a really solid squad of people around you. Can you tell me how you've found and attracted these contributors?
Yeah, so initially I had a couple people helping me out that I had worked with previously. And then about, I want to say 6 months in or so, Meg Lister from Gitcoin, who's working with us now, just reached out and, like wanted to start a conversation about how she could contribute. So she really took that initiative to reach out, see how we could contribute. I had known Meg for a couple years at that point. We met years ago through I think it was, I forget the name, but it was basically like a women in DeFi group through Index Co-op, which is so random because neither of us is really deep in the DeFi space at all. But back then it was like the only women in crypto group that existed. So that's how we initially met. And then we just started talking, realized that she has a lot of complementary skill sets to me. She is one of the best ops people I know in the space. She's just extremely organized, really good at operational things, and I can be a bit, ADD and scatterbrained and not the most organized. And so I think she just brings so much to Rehash and really like is the glue that holds us together. So I think in our case, really, we just got lucky she reached out, but that's kind of like how people get hired and how people hire people in crypto in general is through people they know from crypto Twitter or just people they interact with. So, I mean, I would say, put yourself out there and get to know as many people as you can. And then when the time comes that you need to add someone to your team, or maybe you're looking for a new opportunity, that a lot of that can just happen organically through the connections that you've already established.
Wow, it's so cool to hear how Meg has been involved and to hear how highly you speak of her. You know, she's killing it at Gitcoin and Grad Stack, but to hear that she's also adding so much value to the Rehash community is amazing. So it sounds like she's been with you for about a year and a half now.
Yeah, probably just about quite some time now. She's been around for the majority of Rehash's lifetime, minus maybe the first 6 months or so.
What do you think it is about Rehash that can draw amazing people like Meg in? Because there's so many other things that people could be doing with their time, right? They could be watching any number of TV shows. They could be contributing to any number of projects. They could be working on any number of full-time or part-time jobs. They could be joining any number of other communities. So what is it that brings people together? What is the fire that draws people in?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for Meg or anybody else, but I do think that maybe one big thing that draws a lot of people in is this attitude of inclusivity that we have at Rehash. So when Rehash was first launched back in April of 2022, we launched with just a mere crowdfund. We didn't have a product or even a fully hashed out idea at that time. It was really a mere article where I wrote down some core values that we would have. And one of those values was diversity. That means that we would actually pay attention to diversity. We would actually consciously make a decision to nominate and vote on diverse guests because, you know, everyone likes to say, oh, yeah, we care about diversity. But like, what does that actually mean? You know, like, what does that mean in practice? And what does that look like? And I am super impressed with our community's dedication to that. Like, sure, I led the charge on that, set the value, but really it was the community that pulled through on that. And now, if you go back through all 100 plus Rehash episodes, over 50% of our guests have been women on the podcast, which is a pretty wild statistic for the crypto space. So, truly, the community understood the assignment. They really vibed with this value, and they really made an effort to bring on, you know, women and diverse guests. And we can always like do better as well, like bringing on, you know, I'd love to for us to focus more on bringing on guests from all around the world instead of from, you know, a primarily North American region. So there's always more we can do there, but I do think that the community has done a really good job being dedicated, truly being dedicated to that. And I think that's probably one thing that has, you know, brought in a lot of people to the Rehash community, is that they feel like this is a safe space because they've seen that we actually do value inclusivity and diversity, and we put it into practice over 2+ years and 100+ episodes.
I love that. And it really sounds like you've created a community that has taken the mission of what you're doing super seriously and has taken it and run with it, which is beautiful. You know, you as a leader, you set the initial vision for what this is all about, and then people contribute in ways that you can't even expect. I want to ask you about the interesting thing that you do with episodes, which for anyone outside of Web3, and even a lot of people in Web3, is pretty unique, which is you have made your episodes mintable. I want you to say more about that.
Yeah, so, you know, back in, you know, late 2020, early 2021, when there was the big NFT craze and NFTs became a big thing, people were trying to understand it. And then we saw all of these art NFTs and PFP projects that really blew up in 2021, got a lot of attention, traction. I think people, that was the year that people really started to understand what NFTs are and why would you collect an NFT. You know, the same reason that you would collect a baseball card, or same reason that you would buy a CD or a disc for your favorite artist to support them. Same reason you would buy merch from your favorite artist to support them. Same reason you would subscribe to Patreon of your favorite creators. Same reason, you know, same reason you would do any of these. There's so many aligned, skeuomorphic things that we already do in the Web2 space that essentially equate to collecting a music NFT or an art NFT or a podcast NFT. And so when we started Rehash in April of 2022, that was when music NFTs were really getting their moment. People were starting to, start collecting music. They were like, okay, we were collecting art NFTs for a while and PFPs, and this is fun, but why can't we apply this to other forms of media? And music is something that everybody listens to music. Everyone has their favorite artist. I think it was the next most understandable thing for people to collect. And so then I thought, well, how are podcasts any different from music or art? It's the same thing, And so um I thought, why not experiment with that? And by doing so, we could also have an on-chain record, a database of all of our collectors, our members, which we could then plug into other Web3 tools like JokeRace in order to give our community members governance rights to nominate guests and to vote on guests. So all of that kind of just tied together. It was experimental, but it all just made sense as well.
Thank you for explaining that, Diana. I mean, I think you've just been such a pioneer with these mintable episodes, and you've inspired us at Guild to make these Gilded Age episodes mintable on a platform called Pods, which I see that you also use. I'm curious, did you inspire the creation of this podcast episode minting platform Pods?
Um, so Lucas, who's the founder of Pods, was at Bankless before, and I don't know. He reached out to me as he was getting the idea for Pods and kind of pre-product, and told me about it, and wanted to get me excited about it and stuff. I have no idea. I don't think I talked to him before that, so I have no idea if he was following Rehash or what his connection to that was. We're good friends now, so I guess I could ask him that. But I have no idea, to answer your question. But Pods has been amazing for us. It's been before that we were minting on Manifold, which is also a great tool. But Pods really built like the first thing specifically for podcasters, and it was like 100 times easier to onboard to Pods than the first time we tried to use Manifold. Like Manifold definitely had a higher learning curve, at least back in a couple years ago when we first started on it. Product is probably better now, as is like most products in Web3.
That's super interesting. So it sounds like you used whatever best tool there was at the time, which is Manifold, and then you're happy that there's like a custom platform just for your use case, Pods. And so that's why we're excited to try it out with the Gilded Age. I want to now ask a question about your leadership style. Something that I suspect, which you can challenge, you can add to. Just let me know what you think. Is I suspect that you're a leader that really knows how to ask and receive help. Can you confirm or deny that?
That's interesting you say that, because I think if you asked my family, like if you asked my parents, they would say that I am absolutely like the most stubborn person who will never ask for help, like ever. But I do see what you're saying, and I think I do agree with you. And we've been so fortunate to have so many people help us build out tools. Like I'm non-technical, I can't code things, and we've been able to do a lot of technical things with the help of other people. I think in our case specifically, because we've been so open to experimenting and trying new things and new ideas, we've been able to get help from a lot of apps that we were one of the first customers of. So I think it was that exchange of, we'll be one of the first people to use your product. And in exchange, you kind of, custom help us, like hold our hand through a lot of things and walk us through everything, be there in the DMs for us to get help like all the time. So I think that's kind of like this mutual relationship that we've had with a lot of the tools that we use that maybe we otherwise wouldn't have been able to use or wouldn't have been able to build ourselves or without paying a ton of money to accomplish. So yeah, I would say that's to respond to that. That's probably how we've gotten a lot of the help that we've wanted, is in that exchange of value, and also just through like what I mentioned earlier with like the constant building of relationships through Twitter, through like group chats, through other means. You get to know people and you kind of put it out. I mean, don't be afraid to put it out there. Like if you need help with something, put it out there. And you just never know who's going to reach out and say like, "Hey, I've done that before. I can do that for you real quick." It's super easy. And you're like, "Great. Thank you."
It's funny. I think people are so used to asking Google or ChatGPT for things and just praying for the right answer to be indexed. But Twitter or X or Farcaster, these like human social networks are human search engines. Like you put out a request into the world and you have some goodwill, you have some good reputation. You get some amazing recommendations. And I'm sure you've noticed that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think people are really good at finding people that their like vibes aligned with, values aligned with, and who are doing the same cool stuff they're doing. So I think in our case, like a lot of people, who recognize Rehash's values, like the diversity and inclusion values I talked about earlier, and who want to support people who are doing things like this, and then also want to support people who are kind of pushing the bounds of what's possible with on-chain media. People really want to help when you're trying to accomplish the same goals and the same missions that they are, I think.
So you've talked about some other tools that you have used. I know that you use Guild, which is where the Gilded Age gets its name. Can you talk about how you use Guild?
So right now we use Guild for our token gated holders chat on Telegram. We're actually going to be pivoting that tomorrow. So by the time anyone's listening to this, it would have already been done. Uh Essentially so by the time you're hearing this, we would have just launched a HyperSub for Rehash. Essentially, it's going to be like a podcast delivery service. So you pay a monthly subscription, and in exchange, we deliver all of our podcast NFTs straight to your wallet. You'll still be able to go on pods and mint them yourself, but a lot of times people get busy, they forget to do it, or they're traveling, they're on mobile, they don't have their ledger with them, and they can't connect wallet, whatever. Like there's so many reasons why they can't. So with this delivery service, we'll automatically airdrop every episode into your wallet. You never have to worry about it. You can collect all of them. And then you also get to access our HyperSub token gated chat on Telegram, which is what we're going to be switching our current one over to. And I'm going to be updating the guild settings later today. And so by the time people are listening to this, if you subscribe to our HyperSub, there's also a token gated Telegram chat you'll be able to join. And we're using Guild to gate that.
I've never heard of HyperSub. Can you tell me more about HyperSub?
Oh, okay. So I also just recorded an episode with Johnny Mack, who's the founder and CEO of HyperSub, yesterday, and that should be out as well. So you can go listen to that. He's going to do a much better job than I am at talking about it. But essentially, it is an on-chain subscription service. The simplest way to think about it, the most skeuomorphic way that people might understand, is it's like an on-chain Web3 Patreon. So you can support your favorite creators. There are some artists on there. There are musicians. Cooper has his Coop Record Club on there, for example. There are also some membership clubs of influencers, for lack of better words. So people are using it in all different ways, and definitely I would recommend people to go check it out if you've never heard of it before. I think you can just go to HyperSub. I think it's hypersub.xyz, and you can scroll through and just check out some of the subscription programs that people are running and see how they're running it and see what you can join. So I know ZeroX Designer has a cool one where actually ZeroX Designer has two cool ones. One is where you can buy a monthly subscription and have unlimited access to them to access them for designs. Like if you need some design work done for your new company or your project or your website or whatever, they'll design things for you. They'll give you design feedback. It's like a one-on-one access to a person sort of thing. And then others like Cooper's Record Club, for example, they'll like similar to us, like they'll airdrop you their music NFTs and things like that.
HyperSub seems really cool, and it seems to follow a trend of Web3 UX getting less and less frictionful, realizing that, if you are a user, you're a person, you want to establish a real relationship with a creator or an organization, you don't have to reestablish it again and again. You can subscribe to that person and automatically get the NFTs and different perks if you are paying money.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And another cool thing too about HyperSub is that it works cross-chain. So you can launch your HyperSub on Base, for example, and then if you want to airdrop your music NFTs or your podcast NFTs and they're on Optimism, you can still do that. You can do that across chain. So it's one, from the creator's perspective, it's one central location where you can access all of these. You could like kind of consolidate all of the different things that you're building, that you're working on into one space and drop them like across chains, through like any app that you're using. So for a creator, I think that's a pretty powerful tool as well.
I want to switch gears to something I know you did in Denver, which is you recorded the first ever live tapings of the Rehash podcast. Do you want to talk about that and how that felt different from your normal way of taping Rehash episodes, which is through a kind of medium like this?
Yeah. So when I was at ETH Denver this past year, I thought it'd be a good idea to rent out a podcast studio for half a day and just record 4 podcasts back to back. I didn't think in advance about how exhausting it would be to record 4 podcasts back to back, like 4+ hours straight of nonstop podcasting. So that the morning of, I was a little anxious about it. Just like, why did I do that? Like, why did I think it would be a good idea to make myself talk for 4+ hours straight and be super on and engaging? But honestly, like, my experience with that is that it is so much nicer to be in person with people. It's so much less tiring to podcast when you're in person with someone than when you're staring at a screen. That Zoom fatigue is so real. And I don't know how to explain it because I'm still looking at you right now like I would be in person, but for some reason it's just not the same. And I had so much fun that day. We also experimented a little bit with the podcast format where instead of a one-on-one conversation, we brought in a lot of panels. So we had like an L2 Wars debate between someone from Polygon, Arbitrum, and Optimism, and that was really fun. We also had a live audience the whole day, so it was fun to get engagement and get reactions out of the live audience. I think that also made the process, more fun and less tiring feeling because you felt like people were actually paying attention and listening and engaging. But yeah, it's such a fun day. I definitely want to do that again for ETH Denver next year or whatever other conferences I'm at. Like I absolutely loved the experience.
I love hearing about how much you loved that live taping experience. And I love that you have taken this spirit of experimentation, not just through the tools that you use for the virtual experiences, but for in-person experiences. And it sounds like this experiment went really well, and we'll be seeing more live tapings of the Rehash podcast maybe once or twice or 3 times a year.
Yeah, absolutely. And like shout out to Bello, which is another on-chain tool that we use a lot because Bello is the tool that helped us figure out that the #1 conference that most of our holders go to is ETH Denver. And so that's why we've kind of chosen ETH Denver as, if we have to choose one conference to go to a year, it's going to be ETH Denver because we can see the data on Bello that most of our holders go to ETH Denver. So that's been a really cool experience of having everything on chain, is that we've actually gotten more demographic information and just more information in general about who our community is and how we can meet them where they're at than we would have in a Web2 like traditional media setting.
Bello sounds amazing. Can you tell us about Bello?
Exactly. It's an on-chain analytics tool. So you can plug in your smart contract of, any smart contract really, and get information. Like you can see, information about their wallets, how long their wallet has been around, which shows whether they're more of a crypto native audience or more of a newbie audience. You can see the average net worth of the wallets. You can see other NFTs that they hold. So maybe you can see like other communities that might be adjacent or aligned with your community. You can see the way that we were able to see which conferences our collectors attended is through POAPs. So you could see like a lot of in-person POAPs that people collected were at ETH Denver or ETH Denver events or events in Denver. Like you can kind of see geographically where people are located. You can also see how many people in your holder base also are on Farcaster or Lens, which kind of shows their willingness to experiment a little bit and be new to things and try out new apps and also, see how crypto native they are as well. So, I mean, there's like so much more too that I'm sure I'm forgetting at this moment, but it's a really cool tool to learn a lot about who your community is if your community is on chain.
Man, I am so impressed by the way that you shill these products, probably even better than the actual teams themselves.
I'm just out there shilling. But if you want to, hey, Bello or, Pods or HyperSub, whoever else I've shilled, if you want to sponsor Rehash, we're always looking for sponsors.
Okay, on the note of sponsorships, how do you keep the fun going? How do you keep the podcast funded?
Yeah, so the way that we've been operating sponsorships so far is each season, which our seasons correlate with calendar quarters. So we have, about every 3 months, we have a new season. Each season, we'll go and find sponsors for that season of the podcast. And so it has been kind of an ongoing fundraising or BD process. And I'm actually currently thinking through some other models that we could use, perhaps with HyperSub or something. Don't want to say too much because I just haven't thought it through well enough to talk about it, but want to experiment with that as well and think outside of the box of just traditional ways of going out and doing BD and finding sponsors for the podcast. I think there can be more innovative ways and easier ways to do it with the Web3 tools that we have. And so currently thinking through that right now.
Well, you have an amazing community to ask for input on this as well.
Exactly.
On the note of amazing communities, I wanted to get your sense of what is an amazing community that our audience should be aware of and why should they be aware of this community?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's so many good communities out there for different reasons. I think some communities I really, we're talking about like community building and growth. I would say Boys Club FWB have probably done the best job that I've seen of just building that kind of cult following of people that like really vibe with them. And it might not be for everyone, but the people that are in their communities are like so vibing with them so hardcore that like it almost feels like nothing they do is gonna shoo those people away, which is kind of what you want ultimately as a community. And I think there's like bigger communities like Luca's done a great job with Pudgy Penguins. If we're going back to PFP projects, I think that community has been built up just in a really positive way. I think with a lot of those early PFP projects, it can be easy to like get a lot of negativity in the space when the price goes down and people get mad about it. But I really think that the Pudgy community has been super positive vibes for me this whole time. And it's been nothing but like positive memes, like cute little videos or animations or whatever. And I just think they've done a great job of like keeping the vibes up there. There are, of course, like smaller communities as well that are doing really great things. SheFi, which I mean is not even a small community at this point. It's grown so big, but they're doing great things with education for bringing women and non-binary people into the space and teaching them everything they need to know about crypto and DeFi. And I was talking to Maggie about some of the things that they include in the curriculum, and it's not just like beginner newbie things. Like they really go deep in the weeds. Like she was talking about some things that I was like, I don't think I even know how to do that, having been in the space for so long. So places like that where people are really just like committed to the thing that they're doing and not trying to like build up a quick bit of hype and then rug everyone and run.
Yeah, so communities that have a real reason why they were created in the first place, like they have a real meaningful purpose.
Yeah.
So Diana, you mentioned FWB, Boys Club, Pudgy Penguins, SheFi. What a stellar collection.
And there's so many more too that I'm sure I'm not thinking of at the moment. There's so many communities doing really great things.
I know you shouted out Meg earlier, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to shout out anyone else that contributed a lot to the Rehash community over the years.
Oh my gosh, so many people. I mean, I want to shout out to, I was just going through actually a lot of the names in our community as we were building out our HyperSub. We ended up airdropping a couple of free months subscription to about 10%, 10 to 15% of our community, and those people were past guests and past sponsors. So you're part of that as a past guest of Rehash. And then also to our initial crowdfund supporters who contributed zero point 0.5 ETH or more. There were about 30 of them. And then also to our top 10 collectors on pods. So I was going back and seeing all these people, and I'm just amazed at how many people contributed to that original Mirror crowdfund who are still around today. I think to stick around with a podcast for over 2 years is quite impressive. At least, like, speaking personally, I kind of go through phases of listening to certain podcasts, and I'll dive deep in a podcast for a short time and then kind of jump off of them. There's very few podcasts even I could say that I've listened to regularly for 2+ years. So really impressed by those people. I know Triumph is one of them. Karsten was a really big member in our community in the beginning. Obviously Tyler and Ellie, who helped start the podcast initially with a lot of like the design, the editing, things like that. New people too that have joined. Hannah, sorry, from Guild, has been, really active in the Rehash community as of late. Same with Jake. Andy Boyan has been a huge supporter. I mean, Richie, who's been a guest on the podcast several times and sponsor of the podcast through multiple startups that he's run, multiple iterations that he's run. There are just like some diehard supporters that we've had, and I'm super appreciative of them.
What do you think it is about your leadership that seems to inspire this kind of loyalty?
I think a lot of those names that I named earlier, I think some of them I have grown to be, either I was in the beginning or I've grown to be friends with them at a personal level. And, friends, I think it's friends wanting to support friends. I think, again, going back to like the people who are values aligned with you, who are mission aligned with you, values and vision. Right. So the people that are also trying to do cutting edge things, push the bounds in on-chain media, those people are going to be attracted to each other automatically. The people who share the same values and, kind of are like, we're built from the same cloth, like have that relatability factor. I think that adds a lot to the equation as well. So I think that's definitely a big part of it. And then another part of it, I'd like to think that I try to be open and welcoming to anyone, like whether you're a well-recognized name that everyone knows in the space or whether you have 5 followers on Twitter. Like I really try to treat everyone the same. And so I think like some of the people that have come up in the community are those like smaller names that maybe didn't feel as recognized in other communities, and felt, more recognized here. So I think maybe those are the 2 things that jump out to me at first if I had to guess.
I have to imagine that part of what people are attracted to is the fact that they know that you will even remember if they helped Rehash.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably part of it too. I mean, I try. It's hard because I think especially when you're starting to build a community from scratch, those one-on-one conversations and relationships are super important. And it's tough because that's really time consuming. It's not scalable at all. And so I think a lot of people skip that step because it's so time consuming and it's not scalable. But I do think it's really important. And I don't think I've necessarily done the best job of it as someone that tries to be offline as much as possible. It makes it hard to have those like online DMs going on constantly. But I do try my best with what I can do with that. And I do try to reach out to people and and think of people as people, like to recognize each individual as an individual and to care about them and try to remember things about them that we've talked about. And it's not easy, obviously. Like, we all meet so many people in this space, especially going to conferences or even on crypto Twitter and stuff, but like really caring about the people that you meet, trying your best to do that and like remember people, I think is like it can go far with, with some people at least.
Okay, so I have to use this time as an opportunity to ask the podcast extraordinaire herself what advice she has. What advice do you have as we start our podcast journey, as we build out this initial community?
I think you're doing great so far as a host. Obviously, Guild already has its own community that it's built up over the years. That's a really strong community. So I think it's great that you're starting with an existing community base. And I think it's just recognizing, if I had to give advice, like recognizing people that support you, whether it's early on or later stage, like really recognizing people, being true to yourself, being authentic. Like I think one of the hardest things about being a podcast host or being a creator, being like a public facing figure of any sort, and I'm sure you know this, is that not everyone is going to like you. And the hard part is being okay with that. But I do think that like you'll attract more people to your community and a more loyal and a stronger following if you do allow yourself to be truly yourself and to be authentic and not worry so much whether everyone is going to like that or not. Like, accept the fact that that some people aren't going to like you. And it could be to no fault of your own. Like, it could literally be like the way, like, it could be like the smallest things, like does not speak to your personality or your character at all. You just have to, I think, like, being okay with that and then trying to be as authentic as you can instead of trying to please everyone, I think can go a long way. And that's just general advice I'd give to like any podcast host or any like creator of any kind, I think. And yeah. But you know that already.
I really love that point about authenticity. You will never have everyone like what you're doing. And it's almost even a good sign that there's some people that don't like what you're doing, because that's probably telling you that there are people that really do like what you're doing and would want to share what you're doing and be really loyal long term.
Exactly.
Diana, any final advice you have for community builders that are listening to the Gilded Age?
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing too that I've noticed made a big difference for us recently is moving our community from Discord to Telegram, and then just me making a conscious effort to be more engaged in that, like throughout the day, like 24/7. And it could be talking about something important, or it could be talking about nothing and sending memes. And whether, like, whatever it is, just engaging with people, showing your community that you're there, that you see their messages, and that you can, be silly with them and have fun with them too, and not just like be serious and be pitching the podcast all the time. I think those are things. I think like people in the space sometimes, like, I've noticed, can be very serious all of the time, and everything is about how much value can you provide in terms of knowledge, in terms of alpha. It's always like, what's the alpha? What's the alpha? And a lot of people in this space come from kind of academic backgrounds and want to always be learning, which is like, these are all great things. But I do think there's another side of it, which you can provide value that is entertainment, that is fun, that is relationship building, that is just vibing. And I truly believe that there's just as much value in that as there is value in alpha, teaching people how to do something new, exposing people to a new product or an app. They're equally beneficial. So I would just encourage people to not be afraid to, like, be themselves, like, show your personality, and don't be afraid to just have fun and be silly sometimes and provide entertainment. And not everything has to be like a college lecture and be like serious and, like alpha that people are getting their notepads out for all the time.
That's such great advice. I mean, I think you have done such a great job of providing this sort of educational utility, but what a great reminder to just keep it fun. And that fun itself has lots of utility. And anyways, I want to just thank you again for being one of our first guests of the Gilded Age podcast. You have been a great inspiration for us to even do this whole project in the first place. So it's an honor to have you on as one of our first guests to kick it all off.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be one of the first guests on the podcast, and thank you for this conversation. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed learning from Diana as much as I did today. I want to end with a few notes. Number one, if you want to collect this episode, you can do so on pods.media/guild. The exact link is in the description. Minting this episode enables you to join our audience community on Telegram and shape the future of this podcast. And of course, we have to give a shout out to the host of this podcast, Guild, the ultimate toolkit for on-chain communities. Create your guild at guild.xyz. Until the next episode of The Gilded Age, peace.